At 58 years old, after 33 years of marriage, Helen Caldwell walked out of a courtroom carrying everything she owned in a single cardboard box. Her husband kept the house. He kept the savings. He kept the retirement accounts and the investment portfolio, and the woman he'd been seeing for years. All Helen got was a rusted pickup truck and the deed to a gas station on a mountain road that hadn't seen a customer in over a decade. His lawyers didn't even bother fighting for it. They should have. The courtroom smelled like floor polish and stale air. Helen sat in a wooden chair while a judge read settlement terms into a microphone that made his voice sound like it was coming through a tin can. Her husband, Grant Dawson, 61 real estate developer, wasn't there. He'd sent his attorney instead, a man named Whitfield in a charcoal suit who kept checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be. And maybe he did. This wasn't a complicated case for him. It was just another file to close before lunch. Some men take your house, some men take your name. Grant Dawson took 33 years and called it a fair split. Helen signed where Whitfield pointed. 4 signatures, 2 initials, and her marriage became a stack of documents in a manila folder. Whitfield slid a single sheet across the table. This is the asset schedule. The Briar Creek Property Vehicles retirement accounts and investment portfolio remain with Mr. Dawson per the terms of the agreement. You retain the Ford pickup personal effects and the real property located at Route 11 Goshen County. The real property. That was what they called her father's gas station. A building she hadn't seen in over a decade on a mountain road she barely remembered how to find. Grant's lawyers had appraised it at $14,000 and let her keep it without argument. A rounding error on his balance sheet. Helen picked up the cardboard box from under the table. Inside were the things Grant had left on the kitchen counter for her to collect. A jewelry box her mother had given her, a photo album from their daughter Diane's childhood, a coffee mug that said, "World's Best Mom," with a chip on the rim. 33 years of marriage, and this is what fit in a single box. She walked to the parking lot and set the box in the bed of the truck. The Ford was a 2006 model, with 160,000 miles, a cracked dashboard, and a passenger door that stuck every time you opened it. Grant had bought it for a landscaper who quit after 2 weeks. When the divorce was final, Grant told his lawyer she could keep it. Generous. Helen sat behind the wheel for a long time. She had nowhere to go. No apartment, no job, no friends who weren't really Grant's friends. $211 in a checking account that would soon have only her name on it. She pulled the deed from the folder on the passenger seat. Caldwell Gas and Service. Route 11, Goshen County. Deeded to Helen Ann Caldwell per the last will and testament of Harold Robert Caldwell, deceased. Her father had left her the station when he died 12 years ago. She'd driven down for the funeral, spent 3 days sorting through his things, then locked the door and never went back. Grant said the property wasn't worth the taxes. Helen hadn't argued. She never argued with Grant. About money. About decisions. About anything. He decided. She agreed. For 33 years. Helen turned the key in the ignition. The engine caught on the 3rd try. She pulled out of the courthouse parking lot and pointed the truck south toward the mountains. The drive took 4 hours. Interstate gave way to County Road, which gave way to Route 11, a ribbon of cracked asphalt that climbed into the Blue Ridge through tunnels of oak and hickory. The trees were just beginning to turn. Helen cracked the window and let the mountain air fill the cab. It smelled like damp leaves and wood smoke. And underneath that, something older. Rock and soil and time. She remembered this road from summers as a girl. Her mother would drop her at the station in June and pick her up in August. 2 months with Harold, learning to pump gas and check oil levels. He taught her to read a tire tread, to listen to an engine, and hear what was wrong before you even opened the hood. She could change a fan belt by the time she was 12. Grant found that amusing when they first dated. Later, he found it embarrassing. A real estate developer's wife who knew her way around a carburetor. He never told her to stop. He just stopped asking about it, and eventually she stopped doing it. The way you stop doing anything when the person closest to you pretends it doesn't exist. Route 11 climbed higher. Helen passed a few houses, a church with a gravel parking lot, a general store with a closed sign. Then the road curved around a granite outcrop, and there it was. Caldwell Gas and Service. Before we go any further, if you're the kind of person who loves a story about starting over, when the world says it's too late, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Because Helen's story is just getting started. And trust me, you don't want to miss what she finds inside that station. The building was smaller than she remembered. Single-story cinder block with a flat roof and 2 rusted pump islands out front. Kudzu had crawled over the south wall. The sign above the door, hand-painted by Harold himself, had faded to ghosts of letters. One window had a crack running corner to corner, sealed with duct tape, that had long since curled away from the glass. But the building was standing. The walls were solid. The door, when Helen tried it, was locked tight. She found the key. The lock resisted, then turned with a gritty click. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. And whatever Helen Caldwell expected to find in her dead father's gas station on a forgotten mountain road, it wasn't this. The air inside was still and thick with dust. Late afternoon light filtered through the dirty windows, casting pale rectangles across the concrete floor. A wooden counter ran along the back wall, scarred from decades of use. The cash register sat in the center, an old mechanical one with actual buttons. Its drawer was slightly open, like someone had stepped away and planned to come back. And beside the register, exactly where he'd left them, sat Harold's reading glasses, wire-rimmed, one temple slightly bent. Next to them, a folded newspaper opened to the crossword puzzle. 27 across was filled in with his careful block letters. 28 across was blank. Harold Caldwell had set down his glasses and his crossword puzzle one afternoon 12 years ago and never picked them up again. Helen reached for them slowly. She cleaned them with the hem of her shirt, and the moment her fingers made that motion, something cracked open inside her chest, because she'd done this 1,000 times as a girl. Harold would misplace his glasses 3 times in a single afternoon, and little Helen would find them and clean them and hand them back. "You'd lose your head if it wasn't screwed on," she used to tell him. "That's why I keep you around," he'd say. She set the glasses back on the counter, gently. The way you set something down when you know it belongs exactly where it is. She climbed the narrow staircase to the apartment above, cramped but intact. A bed with a bare mattress. A small kitchen with a 2-burner stove. She opened the single window, and mountain air rushed in hard, pushing out 12 years of staleness in one breath. She sat on the mattress. The springs creaked. Helen Caldwell was 58 years old, sitting in her dead father's apartment above a closed gas station on a road nobody drove anymore. $200 in her checking account. No job, no home, no plan. She didn't cry. She'd done her crying weeks ago alone in the guest bedroom of the house on Briar Creek, while Grant slept in the master suite with the door locked. The crying was finished. What she felt now was quieter than grief. Emptier. Like standing in a house after the furniture has been taken out. She went back downstairs as the light was fading. The station felt different in the dimness. Not abandoned. Not empty. Waiting. Helen walked behind the counter and ran her hand along its surface. Her fingers found a seam in the wood paneling below the register. Not a crack. A seam, straight and deliberate. She knelt down. The panel was about 2 feet square, fitted flush against the wall, but not nailed. She worked her fingernails into the edge and pulled. It came away with a dry scrape. Behind it was a shallow cavity, and inside that cavity were 3 things that would change everything. Helen Caldwell thought she knew about her father. A leather journal, thick and soft-covered, held closed with a rubber band. A metal lockbox, and a bundle of envelopes bound with kitchen twine. Helen's hands trembled as she lifted the journal out. And what was written on that first page, and on every page after, it was a secret Harold Caldwell had kept for 40 years. A secret that an entire valley remembered. A secret that everyone knew except the one person who should have known most. His own daughter. Now, I need you to stay with me here, because what Helen found in that journal is the heart of this entire story. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, and I'll tell you exactly what Harold Caldwell was doing behind that counter all those years, when the world thought he was just pumping gas. Helen opened the journal to the first page and started reading. September 14th, 1981. Lent Tom Brennan $200 for the electric bill. Wife is due in March and they can't afford to lose heat. Told him to pay when he can. He won't be able to, but that's all right. She turned the page, fixed Carol Dunbar's transmission, charged her $30 for parts, nothing for labor. She's raising 3 kids alone since Ray left. Next page, next entry, next family. Bought winter coats for the Sutter children. Left them on the porch in a garbage bag so it looked like a donation drop-off. Jim Sutter's got too much pride to take a handout, so you don't make it look like one. Page after page, hundreds of entries spanning 4 decades. Every loan Harold ever made, every repair he did for free. Every bag of groceries he slipped into someone's truck while they weren't looking. Each one a record of a kindness he never mentioned to a single living soul. This wasn't a journal. It was a map of every family in the valley. Not their debts, their needs. Harold noted when children were born, when someone lost a job, when a roof needed patching. He tracked the loans some people paid back, and he quietly forgave every single one they couldn't. The lockbox held $412 in small bills, a set of keys, and the original deed passed down from Harold's father. $412. That was what Harold Caldwell had left for himself after a lifetime of giving everything else away. The envelopes were thank you notes, 8 of them each in different handwriting. One from a woman named Linda, whose family would have lost their farm if Harold hadn't paid their mortgage for 3 months. She didn't find out it was him until years later. One from a man named Curtis. He'd been sitting in his truck in the station parking lot at 2 in the morning, thinking about driving off the mountain. When Harold came downstairs in his bathrobe, knocked on the window and said, "Engine trouble or people trouble?" Curtis wrote, "I told him people trouble." He said, "Well, I can't fix people, but I can make coffee." We sat on the porch until sunrise. He never asked what was wrong. He just stayed. But not every entry was about strangers. One page dated June 1989 was shorter than the rest. The handwriting was smaller, tighter, like Harold was writing something he didn't want to take up too much space. Helen's school play was tonight. She called last week to remind me. Called again this morning. I told her I'd be there. But Tom Brennan's truck threw a rod on Route 11 at 4 o'clock, and he had no way to get his wife to her doctor's appointment in the morning. I stayed and pulled the engine. By the time I finished, it was 10, and the play was over. I called Helen to apologize. She said it was fine. She said she understood. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just said, "It's okay, Daddy." That silence was worse than any door she could have slammed. I chose a stranger's truck over my own daughter's play. I told myself it was the right thing to do. I'm not sure anymore. I'm not sure I ever was. Helen stared at the entry. She remembered that play. She'd stood on stage in a pilgrim costume made from a brown paper bag, scanning the audience for Harold's face. He wasn't there. She'd told her mother it didn't matter. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself that, for 30 years, it mattered, and Harold knew it. He'd known it the night it happened. He just didn't know how to be two things at once: a man who never turned anyone away, and a father who showed up when his daughter needed him. So he chose the one he knew how to do, and lost the other one slowly, the way you lose anything you stop paying attention to. Then Helen turned a page and stopped breathing, because she saw her own name. The entry was dated 3 years before Harold died. Helen called today. Sounded tired. That husband of hers is spending again. New car, new suit, always something new. She says she's fine, but she's not fine. I can hear it in her voice. The way she talks around things instead of about them. Helen pressed her hand over her mouth. I wish she'd come home. I wish she'd come home and let me teach her to change oil again and drink coffee that's too strong and sit on the porch and watch the trucks go by. But she won't, not yet. Maybe not ever. The last line was written slightly below the rest. I just hope she knows the door is open. Helen closed the journal and pressed it against her chest. The station was completely dark. Stars appearing above the ridgeline. Total mountain silence. Harold Caldwell hadn't been pumping gas for 40 years. He'd been holding an entire valley together with his bare hands, one small kindness at a time, and he never said a word about it. The crossword was unfinished. The glasses sat on the counter. But somewhere between the last page of that journal and the first star above the ridge, something took shape inside Helen that hadn't been there when she walked through the door. She wasn't going to sell this place. She was going to open it back up. Helen woke to birdsong and the smell of dust. She washed her face in the bathroom sink, heated water in a dented saucepan, and carried her coffee downstairs. The repair bay was in better shape than the main building. Harold had built it himself in the 70s, 2 bays with a hydraulic lift. But it was the back wall that stopped her. Harold's tools, hanging on a pegboard that stretched floor to ceiling. Every tool outlined in black marker so you'd know instantly if something was missing. Wrenches by size. Socket sets in their cases. And in the center of the bottom row, his favorite ratchet. 3/8 drive. The rubber grip worn smooth from 40 years of use. Helen picked it up and felt the weight settle into her palm the way it used to when she was 12. And Harold stood behind her, showing her how to feel when a bolt was tight enough. Don't force it, he'd say. Listen to the metal. It'll tell you when to stop. Her fingers found the groove she'd carved into the workbench at 9, dragging a flathead screwdriver while Harold wasn't looking. He'd found it the next day and shook his head. Now, the bench has character, he'd said. That groove was still there. 49 years later. Everything Helen had done in the last 33 years could be erased with 4 signatures in a courtroom. But a scratch made by a 9-year-old girl with a screwdriver was still here. In the corner stood a green metal filing cabinet. The smallest key from the lockbox opened it. Inside were folders organized by family name, but these weren't journal entries. These were follow-ups. Brennan Tom, paid back $50 in June. Baby girl born healthy, named her Rose. Don't mention the rest of the debt. Dunbar Carroll, oldest got into community college, needs $200 for textbooks. She tried to refuse, left it in her glove box. Sutter Jim, roof held through winter. Patched the south side myself in October. He doesn't know. Thinks the landlord fixed it. Harold hadn't just lent money and walked away. He'd tracked these families for decades. A man who barely covered his own bills, making sure his neighbors didn't fall through the cracks. She was still reading when she heard tires on gravel, an old Chevy truck pulling in slow. A man climbed out, heavy-set plaid flannel feed store cap. He stared at the building, then saw Helen. "I'll be damned," he said softly. "You're Harold's girl, Roy Tate, 2 miles down the mountain. Played cards with Harold every Thursday for years." Helen told him the truth. "My husband divorced me. He got the house and everything in it. This is all I have left." Roy didn't offer sympathy. He walked back to his truck and returned with a thermos and 2 mugs. "Well then," he said, pouring coffee, "you'll need good coffee. Not whatever ancient can you found in Harold's cabinet." They sat on overturned buckets. Helen told him about the journal. Roy shook his head, laughing. "That stubborn old fool. I only knew because I caught him once, 3 in the morning, loading groceries into the Sutter family's truck. I said, 'Harold, what are you doing?' He said, 'Reorganizing inventory.' Reorganizing it right into their back seat." Helen laughed, sudden and unguarded. She couldn't remember the last time. "Your daddy never turned away a soul who needed help," Roy said. "Used to say helping people was cheaper than church and did more good. Folks around here still talk about him. Not big speeches, just quiet things. Someone will mention their lights stayed on because of Harold, or their car ran 1 more year because Harold fixed it for nothing." "Why didn't he tell me any of this?" Roy looked at her straight. "Because Harold didn't think it was anything special. He thought it was just what you did when you lived somewhere and had 2 hands and a set of wrenches." They sat in silence. A truck passed on Route 11. The driver lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel in the mountain, greeting Helen had forgotten about. "Harold Caldwell died owing nothing to anyone," Roy said quietly, "and being owed by everyone. That's the richest a man can get." Late that afternoon, Helen heard an engine struggling on the road, a white pickup limping toward the station, steam rising from under the hood. It rolled to a stop, and a young man climbed out. Maybe 23, lean and sunburned, grease-stained t-shirt, boots that had been resoled at least once. He popped the hood and stared at the engine with the focused look of someone who knew exactly what was wrong. "Radiator," Helen called. He looked up, surprised that a 58-year-old woman had diagnosed his engine from 20 feet away by sound alone. "Hose blew. Upper 1. I've got a spare but no tools." "I've got tools. Pull it in." His face showed the calculation of someone used to help that came with conditions. "I can pay for the bay time. I didn't ask for money. I said, pull it in." His name was Caleb Pruitt. He had the old hose off in 6 minutes. Helen found a replacement in Harold's stock room. She watched his hands move with quick, precise confidence. He'd learned from his grandmother's boyfriend's shop in Boone. Every summer until 16. Last 3 places didn't work out. Helen didn't ask why. She could see enough. Young, no support, probably sleeping in that truck. The kind of person Harold would have noticed immediately. "I'm reopening this station," Helen said. "I need someone who can turn a wrench." "You don't know me. I know you replaced that hose faster than most mechanics with twice your experience. That's enough for today. I'll think about it. Come back tomorrow if you decide. I'll have coffee on." Caleb drove off. Helen went back inside and found the last envelope she hadn't opened. Different from the others. Sealed. Addressed in Harold's handwriting. 1 word on the front. Helen. 2 sheets of yellow legal paper. "Dear Helen, if you're reading this, you've found your way back. I always knew you would. I want you to know something about this station. It isn't worth much on paper, but it's worth everything to the people who depend on it. I don't mean the gas or the repairs. I mean the fact that it's here. that someone is behind the counter, that the coffee is on and the light is on and the door is open. I know about Grant. I've known for a long time. He's not a bad man, Helen. He's just a man who measures everything in dollars and thinks that's the same as value. This station is yours. Not because it's worth money, but because you're the only person I trust to understand what it was for. Don't sell it. Don't let anyone tell you it's worthless. And if you can keep the coffee on, that matters more than you think. Signed with just his name, Harold. Helen folded the paper carefully, set it on the counter beside his reading glasses and the crossword. 3 objects from a man who had been gone 12 years. And the station felt more full of him now than it had when she walked through the door. She was 58, broke, divorced, sleeping above an abandoned gas station. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she knew exactly what she was going to do next. Caleb's truck pulled into the lot at 7 the next morning. "Coffee's on," Helen said. "You said it would be." "I'll work a week," Caleb said. "See how it goes." Fair enough. That was how it started. A mug of coffee and a week. They divided the work without discussion. Caleb took the repair bay. Helen tackled the main building, starting with the kudzu. She pulled it off the south wall by hand-filling wheelbarrows until the pile was taller than she was, hands raw, by noon. Roy showed up at 9 with lumber. Had the porch railing replaced by 11:30. Helen tried to pay him. He looked at her like she'd insulted him. "Harold helped me re-shingle my roof in '98. 3 days. Wouldn't take a dime. Said I could buy him a steak when I won the lottery." He hammered a nail into the step he was replacing. "Never won the lottery, so this is the steak." Caleb got the furnace running after 2 afternoons. "That furnace should have been condemned 10 years ago," he said, "but it's stubborn." "Runs in the family," Helen said. The rain came on a Wednesday night. Not mountain rain, the gentle kind that taps the roof and makes you sleep deeper. This was the other kind. The kind that comes sideways and doesn't stop and finds every crack in every wall you thought was solid. Helen woke at 2 in the morning to the sound of water hitting concrete. She ran downstairs. The south wall, the one she'd pulled the kudzu off by hand, had a seam in the mortar she hadn't seen. Water was pouring through it onto the stockroom floor. 3 boxes of parts Caleb had just sorted were soaked. The ceiling above the counter was dripping in 2 places. A puddle was forming around the base of the coffee maker. She grabbed every towel and bucket she could find. Caleb came down in his boots and a t-shirt, and they worked for an hour, pushing water toward the drain, moving boxes, stuffing rags into the wall seam. When the rain finally slowed, the stockroom floor was an inch deep, and half the parts inventory was ruined. Caleb went back upstairs without a word. Helen sat on the wet floor behind the counter, her back against the wall, her jeans soaked through, her hands raw from wringing towels. 3 o'clock in the morning in a building that was falling apart around her. She pulled out her phone, scrolled to a number she'd saved weeks ago. A real estate agent in the valley Roy had mentioned once in passing. Her thumb hovered over the call button. 1 tap, and this would be over. She could sell the property, take whatever it brought, rent a small apartment somewhere, and stop pretending that a 58-year-old woman with no money could hold together a building that God and gravity were trying to pull down. Maybe Grant was right. Maybe this place wasn't worth it. Her eyes drifted to the counter. Harold's journal was sitting where she'd left it, next to the glasses and the crossword. The leather cover was spotted with water from the leak. She reached over and wiped it dry with her sleeve. Then she opened it to a random page. "Fixed the Dunbar girl's bicycle tire today." She rode it home, waved at me from the road. "Small thing, good day." "Small thing, good day." Helen closed the journal, put the phone back in her pocket, got up off the wet floor. She found a bag of mortar mix in the bay left over from when Harold patched the foundation years ago. She mixed it in a bucket with water from the sink, carried it to the south wall, and sealed the seam herself. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't professional. But by the time the sun came up, the wall was holding. Caleb came downstairs at 6. He looked at the patched wall, looked at the bucket, looked at Helen, who was sitting on the counter stool with a cup of coffee still in her wet jeans. He didn't ask what happened during the night. He could see it in the mortar and in her face. "Coffee's on?" she said. "You said it would be." The pumps were the biggest problem. Helen called every fuel company within 50 miles. The first 3 said no. The fourth was run by a man named Grady, Harold Caldwell's daughter. "Your daddy kept my trucks running when I was just starting out. Wouldn't charge me full price, because he said a man trying to build something shouldn't be punished for it." Grady sent a crew. They inspected the tanks, flushed the lines, installed new pump heads. Helen signed a fuel contract with terms she could barely manage. A gamble. Everything about this was a gamble. The first customer came on a Thursday, an older woman in a white sedan. "Are you open?" "We are." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I used to come here every week when Harold was alive. He always checked my tires and never charged me." Helen filled her tank and checked her tires. When the woman reached for her wallet for the tire check, Helen waved her off. "Your daddy did the same thing," the woman said quietly. "Exact same wave." After that, the customers came steadily. People who remembered the station when it was Harold's. They came for gas and stayed for the porch. Helen bought a proper coffee maker with the last of the lockbox money. Caleb settled into the bay with a focus Helen hadn't expected. She paid him from the fuel sales. It wasn't much. He didn't complain. When she saw him stretching his back beside the lift, she told him to take the spare room upstairs. He resisted. "Nobody's fine sleeping in a truck, Caleb. Take the room." He nodded once and went back to work. Helen ran the station the way she believed Harold would have. When a young mother pulled up with her tank near empty and a worried look that had nothing to do with the car, Helen filled it and told her to pay when she could. When an elderly couple asked about brake pads and Helen could see the math behind their eyes, she quoted them half the price. She wasn't trying to be generous. She was trying to be useful. There was a difference, and Harold had understood it better than anyone she'd ever known. One evening, on the porch with Roy, Helen said something she hadn't planned on saying. "I didn't come back to save this place. I came back because I had nowhere else to go." Roy watched the ridge change color. "That's usually how it works. The people who save things are never the ones who set out to do it. They're the ones who just showed up and didn't leave." If you've made it this far into Helen's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. 3 weeks of something that felt dangerously close to peace. Then the mail came. White envelope. Heavy stock. Whitfield and Associates. Grant was filing a motion to reopen the divorce settlement. His lawyers claimed Helen had failed to disclose the property's true value. They cited a planned highway expansion that would raise the land's assessment. They wanted the court to force a sale. Helen read it 3 times, looking for a weakness in the argument. She didn't find one. She couldn't afford to fight this. Grant had an attorney on retainer. Helen had a broom and a saucepan, and Grant knew it. He wasn't filing because he thought he'd win. He was filing because he thought she'd fold. Because she'd always folded. For 33 years. That night, Diane called. "Mom, I heard about the lawyer's letter." "How?" "Dad told me." Of course he did. Grant was building his case before it even started. lining up allies, framing the narrative. He'd been doing it to Helen for 33 years. "If the property is worth something, why not sell?" Diane said. "Take the money. Start over properly." "I'm not selling." "Why not?" "Because this isn't about money." "Mom, I'm worried about you. You're living in a building that should be condemned working a gas pump, and now Dad is taking you to court." "Diane, I'm handling it. That's what you always say. And then Dad handles it." The words hit hard. Helen could have told Diane the truth, that Grant never handled anything except his own comfort, that handling was a polite word for control. She didn't. Some truths need to arrive on their own schedule. "I love you," Helen said. "I'll call you this weekend." Grant came 3 days later. Silver SUV, new model. The kind of vehicle that cost more than most Valley families earned in a year. He was 61 and looked 55. Navy polo, pressed khakis. "Nice little project," he said, studying the station the way he studied properties before buying them. "Your father's place." He walked past the counter, hands still in his pockets. Then he stopped. Helen saw what he was looking at. The photograph. Harold and 6-year-old Helen in front of the station. Overalls. Wide grin. Harold's hand on her shoulder. Grant stared at it for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes that Helen hadn't seen in years. Something that predated the suits and the spreadsheets and the woman he'd been seeing. "She looks like Diane at that age," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then he straightened, put his hands back in his pockets. The moment closed like a door. "You didn't come to talk about my father," Helen said. "You didn't come to talk about my father. The property is undervalued, Helen. That highway expansion will make this land worth 10 times the appraisal. I want what's fair. You got the house, the savings, everything. Your own lawyers called this a teardown. And now you want that too. I want what the court should have considered. This property was my father's. He left it to me. It was never part of our marriage. That's for the court to decide." "You're right, Grant. It is worth something, just not the kind of something you understand." She could see the rehearsed conversation collapsing behind his eyes. He'd expected the Helen who signed where Whitfield pointed. That Helen was gone. "I'll see you in court," Grant said. The gravel popped under his tires like small bones breaking. That night, Caleb asked, "You going to be all right?" Helen looked at the letter on the counter. "I don't have a lawyer. I don't have money for one, so I honestly don't know." She lay on the mattress and thought about the families in Harold's journal who had faced worse with less, and the man who made sure they didn't face it alone. Harold always knew what to do next. Helen didn't. But she wasn't leaving. Roy walked in the next morning, looked at the letter, and settled onto the stool. "They've been talking about that highway for 20 years, he said. "Never happens, but that won't stop a lawyer from billing hours over it. I can barely afford the coffee, Roy." Roy was quiet. "Then, there's a woman in Barton, retired attorney. Quit practicing 5 or 6 years back. Her daughter was sick when she was little. Heart condition. Needed surgery the insurance wouldn't cover." Helen waited. "Your daddy paid for it. $3,200. Sent it through the doctor's office as an anonymous donation. Never told anyone. But she found out. People around here always find out." The attorney arrived the next morning. Virginia Holbrook, late 60s, tall and straight-backed, reading glasses on a chain, a leather briefcase that looked like it had won in most courtrooms in Virginia. She read the legal letter with the calm of someone who had seen this exact injury 1,000 times. "This is a nuisance claim," Virginia said. "The strategy isn't to win, it's pressure until you fold." Can he win? Not if the property was never marital. Was the station ever in both your names? No, Grant never set foot here until 3 days ago. Inherited property that was never commingled stays separate. His lawyer cited a highway expansion. She waved a hand. Speculative future value isn't grounds for reopening a settlement. His own lawyers appraised it at $14,000 and dismissed it. That's their judgment on the record. If they now claim higher, they're contradicting their own work. That's their problem. They found the original deed in the filing cabinet. 1971, grandfather to Harold. Harold's will property solely to Helen. Chain of title unbroken. "This is clean," Virginia said. "His motion will be dismissed." "What do I owe you?" Virginia stopped packing her briefcase. "Your father paid for my daughter's surgery when I couldn't. $3,200 he didn't have for a child he'd never met. He never told me it was him." She closed the briefcase. The latches clicked like a verdict. "There's nothing you owe me, Helen. This one was paid for a long time ago." Helen stood on the porch and watched the gray sedan disappear. Harold Caldwell was still helping people, still fixing things, even from the grave. That afternoon, Caleb was reorganizing the filing cabinet when the sound from the bay stopped. Not gradually, like a switch flipped. Helen walked to the bay door. Caleb was sitting on the milk crate with a folder open on his lap, staring at it. The tab was labeled in Harold's handwriting. Pruitt. One entry? Clara Pruitt, surgery fund, $3,200. Heart valve replacement, August 1994. Sent through the doctor's office as anonymous donation. Don't let her know where it came from. Caleb's hands were shaking. He closed the folder and pressed it flat against his knees. "My grandmother," he said, his voice tight, controlled. "She had heart surgery when I was a baby. The insurance denied the claim. Then someone paid for it. Anonymous. She never found out who." He swallowed. "She told me that story every time I visited her in Boone. She'd say, 'Caleb, somebody saved my life, and I don't know their name. Because they did that, you're here. Your mother is here. All of us are here because one person decided a stranger was worth $3,200. His jaw tightened. She looked for that person for 30 years, put ads in newspapers, asked at churches. She died 4 years ago. She never found out. Helen sat on the concrete floor beside the milk crate. She didn't say anything. Some moments need silence more than words. "He never met me," Caleb said quietly. "Harold never knew I'd exist. But the reason I'm alive, the reason my grandmother survived, is because a man running a gas station on a road nobody uses decided to pay for a stranger's surgery." "That's who he was," Helen said. Caleb stood, returned the folder to the cabinet, went back to work without another word. But he stayed later than usual that night. And when he cleaned Harold's tools before locking up, he handled each one the way you handle something that belongs to someone you wish you'd known. Diane arrived on a Saturday, unannounced. White blouse and tailored pants that belonged in her design office, not a gravel lot on a mountain road. She walked toward the station with the careful steps of someone entering a place she'd already decided was a mistake. "You didn't call." "I wanted to see for myself." She followed Helen inside and stopped. The station looked nothing like what she'd expected. Helen could see the case falling apart in her daughter's face. Clean windows, counter scrubbed to honey-colored wood, coffee maker steaming. Harold's glasses on the counter beside the crossword, not abandoned, but honored. Through the window, Roy pulled in with firewood, stacked it, drove off. 4 minutes, didn't come inside. Who was that? Roy, your grandfather's closest friend. Shows up with firewood every week. He'd be insulted if I tried to pay him. Diane stared into her coffee. Dad says you're being unreasonable, holding on to this place out of spite. What do you think? Her eyes were wet. I think you're different. I don't know what happened here, but you're not the same person who walked out of that courtroom. I sided with Dad during the divorce, Diane said. He had the answers. He always had answers. And you just agreed with everything. I didn't respect that, Mom. Helen didn't flinch. You were right not to. I spent a long time agreeing because it was easier. That's not something to respect. But I'm done agreeing. Helen told her the real version of Harold. The journal. The families. Virginia Holbrook. Caleb finding his grandmother's name in the filing cabinet. A $3,200 payment in 1994 still echoing through the valley. Diane listened without interrupting. When Helen finished, the afternoon light had climbed the far wall. He never told you any of this? Not a word. Why? Because he didn't think it was anything special. They sat together as evening came. The silence between them wasn't distance anymore. It was rest. He called me last week, Diane said. Sounded different, quieter. Asked about you. I told him you'd turned into someone he never imagined. That's because he never tried to imagine it. Helen squeezed her daughter's hand. He wasn't a bad man, Diane. He just measured the wrong things. Diane left the next morning, held on longer than usual. Call me after the hearing. The hearing was on a Wednesday, 6 weeks after Grant filed. Virginia met Helen on the courthouse steps. 3 documents. Original deed. Harold's will. Chain of title. That's all we need. Grant was in the front row with Whitfield. Charcoal suit. He didn't look at Helen. Whitfield presented his argument slowly, with extra words, hoping volume would substitute for substance. 8 minutes about highway expansions and equitable distribution. Virginia stood. She didn't clear her throat. She placed 3 documents on the bench and took 4 minutes to dismantle everything Whitfield had spent 8 building. Inherited property. Never jointly held. Never improved with marital funds. Grant's own legal team appraised it at $14,000 and dismissed it. Speculative future value isn't grounds for reopening a settlement. This property was separate before the marriage and separate at dissolution. We ask that it be denied. Whitfield's rebuttal had no documents behind it. Nothing but speculation billed at $400 an hour. Motion denied, the judge said. This matter is closed. Outside, Helen was walking to her truck when she heard footsteps. Grant was on the bottom step, jacket over one arm. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Something had shifted behind his eyes. Not defeat exactly. Something quieter. Like a man who had just realized the spreadsheet he'd been building his whole life was missing a column he couldn't name. When did you become this person? He asked. I always was, Helen said. You just never looked. She drove home. The word came without effort. Home. The sun was low when she pulled into the lot. Helen walked to the breaker panel. Harold's handwriting on every switch. She found the one marked sign and flipped it. Through the window, Harold's hand-painted sign lit against the darkening sky for the first time since he died. Faded, cracked, but on. Caldwell Gas and Service. Caleb came around the corner, looked up. Looks good, he said. Not bright, not new, but on. And on was enough. 3 months later, the dogwoods were blooming. Spring had come the way it always did. Slowly. And then, all at once. The station was alive. The pumps ran daily. Helen had stopped counting cars because there were enough. Enough was a word she'd learned to respect. Caleb had changed. A steadiness that hadn't been there before. He'd enrolled in an ASE certification program, studying on a used laptop Helen bought for $85 at a pawn shop. He sat at the counter after hours taking notes in a composition book with careful block letters that slanted to the right. When Helen mentioned the similarity to Harold's handwriting, Caleb shrugged. Good handwriting is good handwriting. He never cut corners, never quoted more than the work was worth. Helen watched him one morning walking a nervous teenager through her first oil change. Patient, step by step, letting her make mistakes, letting her fix them herself. "You're good at this," Helen said. "At what? Teaching." "I'm just showing her what goes where. That's what teaching is." A week later, Helen was in the bay looking for a 10mm socket that had gone missing from the pegboard. Caleb had driven to the parts store down the mountain. She checked the workbench drawers, the toolbox under the lift, the shelf above the compressor. She found the socket in a coffee can next to Caleb's composition book. The book was open. She didn't mean to read it, but her eyes caught the handwriting before her brain could look away. Careful block letters, slanting slightly to the right. Harold's handwriting. Except it wasn't Harold's. "Mrs. Patterson's alternator belt is cracking. She doesn't know yet. Check it next time she comes for gas. Don't charge for the inspection." Below that, "Kid who brought the Honda last week. Tires are bald on the inside. Alignment is off. He can't afford both. Do the alignment put it on the ticket as tire rotation. Cover the difference." Below that, "Roy's truck is burning oil. He won't say anything. Top it off when he's on the porch. He doesn't need to know." Helen closed the book, set it back exactly where it was, put the socket in her pocket, and walked out of the bay. She didn't say a word to Caleb about it. Not that day. Not ever. Because that was how Harold would have handled it. You don't interrupt someone in the middle of becoming who they're supposed to be. You just make sure the coffee's on when they get there. The porch had become a gathering place. Regulars with lawn chairs, a checkerboard tournament nobody officially scored, but everyone took seriously. Helen learned their names, their troubles. She kept the information the way Harold had, in her head and in her actions, quietly. Diane came back in May with her children. Marcus 9, Sophie 6. Helen showed them the station, the tools, the pegboard. She lifted Marcus up to see the outlines. Let Sophie ring up an imaginary sale on the mechanical register. Taught Marcus to check tire pressure. 32, he read. Perfect. You just did your first tire check. He grinned, the same grin Helen had worn at his age in this same bay, learning these same things from Harold. Diane watched from the bay door. What was on her face wasn't worry anymore. It was recognition. That evening on the porch, Roy brought a framed photograph. Harold and young Helen in front of the station. She was maybe 6. Overalls, wide grin. Harold behind her with one hand on her shoulder. He said it was the only time both of you looked exactly like who you were supposed to be. Helen hung it behind the counter, next to the glasses, next to the crossword, next to the letter. It wasn't a big life. It wasn't a wealthy life. But it was a useful life, and Helen had come to understand that usefulness was its own kind of wealth. The kind that didn't show up on balance sheets but held communities together. That was everything Harold knew that Grant never learned. And it took Helen a divorce, a cardboard box, a 4-hour drive, and a hidden panel behind a cash register to learn it herself. Late one afternoon, a minivan pulled in. Road dusty. Cracked tail light. A young woman climbed out, maybe 30, faded jacket, 3 children in the back seat, the youngest asleep in a car seat. She had the expression Helen had seen on other faces, and in her own mirror. Someone carrying more than she could say. "Could I get some gas?" Helen filled the tank, checked the oil, topped off the windshield fluid, added air to a low tire without asking. When the pump clicked off, the woman opened her purse. Helen watched her fingers move past receipts and loose change. The quick motion of someone counting what they had and hoping it would be enough. Helen had made that motion. In the courthouse parking lot, in the grocery store, with exact change. She knew what it looked like from the inside. "Pay it next time you're through," Helen said. "What? Next time you drive through? I can't just take." "Sure you can. I'll be here." The woman's eyes filled. "Why, my father used to say, they're not a stranger. They're just someone I haven't helped yet." The woman drove away with a full tank and aired-up tires and a story she would carry with her. She'd come back. They always came back. Not because they owed money, because they owed a feeling. The kind of debt people wanted to repay. The kind Harold had been creating for 40 years. Helen closed up the station at dusk. Caleb had locked the bay and gone upstairs. Roy's firewood stacked against the wall. Checkerboard set for tomorrow. She turned off the lights one by one, picked up Harold's reading glasses, cleaned them with the hem of her shirt, set them back beside the crossword. 27 across was still filled in. 28 across was still blank. She left them that way, because some things aren't meant to be finished. The unfinished crossword wasn't incomplete. It was a bookmark. Harold's way of saying, I was here. I was in the middle of something, and the middle of something is a fine place to be. Helen locked the front door with the key her father had turned 10,000 times before her. Through the glass she could see the sign glowing against the darkening sky. Caldwell Gas and Service. Faded. Hand-painted. Lit. You didn't have to be bright. You didn't have to be new. You just had to be there. Behind the counter, on the porch, at the pump. Wherever people needed someone, you showed up and you stayed, and you kept the coffee on. One of them died rich. The other one died wealthy. And his daughter, 12 years later, standing in the doorway of the station he built with his bare hands, finally knew the difference. She climbed the stairs to the apartment that smelled like coffee and motor oil and home. She sat on the edge of the mattress. On the nightstand, next to a glass of water and Harold's letter, was a composition book she'd bought at the same store where Caleb bought his. She hadn't told him. She hadn't told anyone. She opened it to the first page, picked up a pen, and in handwriting that was smaller and neater than it used to be, slanting slightly to the right, she wrote the date. Then she wrote her first entry. Caleb started a journal of his own. He doesn't know I saw it. I won't tell him. Harold would understand. She closed the book and set it on the nightstand. 3 journals now. Harold's in the cavity behind the register, filled with 40 years of quiet kindness. Caleb's on the workbench in the bay just beginning. And Helen's on the nightstand beside her bed, 1 entry old. 3 people. 3 books. 1 gas station on a road most people forgot existed. And the same careful handwriting passed down not through blood, but through something stronger. Passed down not through blood, but through something stronger. She lay down on the mattress. Through the window she could see the sign glowing and the stars beyond it and the ridgeline dark against the sky. She was 58 years old. She was just getting started.